to welcome everyone formally to our webinar now, and that is about how to give excellent customer service for vulnerable people. Certainly proving to be a very popular topic. We've had a flood of last-minute registrations for it, and certainly a large number of people are already online. So I'm just delighted to welcome our two speakers to today's webinar. Delighted to welcome for her first webinar with us, Jackie Crawley, who is the Managing Director of KMB. And Jackie, you're on the DMA Vulnerable Task Force. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what the task force is aimed at doing?
Yes, certainly. I've been involved now with the DMA task force for, this will be my third year, and we have taken some of the issues, not just from contact centres, but from marketeers, and looked at them from the vulnerable consumer perspective. So what do we need to do to help organisations? And what we have done is created some best practice guides, some information that I'll talk about in my presentation, and we're also clearly going to be looking at how we manage data with vulnerable consumers in the future.
Wonderful. And also delighted to welcome back a regular campaigner on our webinar program. I think we worked out it's over 40 webinars you've been doing with us. So Mike, this is certainly a topic I've been delighted that we can cover, and I'm delighted that Genesis are happy to sponsor this and deliver some quite, you're going to be delivering some quite unique insights onto how things can be helped.
Indeed, John. Yeah, thank you for the invite, and hi everybody. It's nice to be back, and I really like this subject. In my family, I've had a dementia sort of experience, if you like, with my parents, and kind of watching, or one parent rather, and kind of watching how that evolved, if you like, for my mum was quite interesting and challenging as a family. But I can also imagine how that could be challenging for service providers to such customers. Because it develops. So from that perspective, it started off not very difficult, but then became very difficult. So yeah, I'm very interested in this topic, and I look forward to the webinar.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for joining us for this, Mike. Certainly a very popular topic already. We've already got 120 people online, and people are still dialing in all the time. So certainly very popular so far. If you want to watch a replay, you can do that later on this afternoon on this link. It's the sort of topic, this one, I would imagine a number of you would like to share with your leadership team. If you're not already logged into our chat room, that's at callcenterhelper.com/chat. If you've not used our webinars before, we run a chat room alongside, so just put in your first name, last name, and email. It does come up in a separate window. Unfortunately, the webinar software doesn't allow us to integrate the two together, but nowadays screens are so big that you can have the chat room on one side and the webinar on the other side, and then you can get all the details through that way. You can chat with other people in the audience. Once you're in the chat room, we have this link at the top of the chat room to download the webinar slides. So there's quite a lot of detail we're going through, so it'd be quite useful if you were able to go into the chat room and download the webinar slides in there. There's also an added advantage being in there. You can ask questions of our panel. Just use hashtag question, just type that in if it's a question, or if you've got a tip, use hashtag tip. And if you've got a tip on how to deal with vulnerable customers, you could win for yourself this rather nice bottle of champagne. Or if you prefer a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift card, we can certainly arrange that as an alternative. So that's the link, callcenterhelper.com/chat. Now we're going to do a poll next, and the poll that we're going to kick off with is about identifying vulnerable customers. And that is, do you have a box in your customer system, or typically known as a CRM system, that you can identify vulnerable customers with? So for instance, a tick box. So the answers are yes, we have one, no, we don't have one, or it's something that we're planning. So I'd just like to vote on this. I have absolutely no idea what the answers like to be. Mike, I don't know if you've got any thoughts where it might end up.
No, indeed, I'm curious, if you like, about the answer too, and looking forward to it. I think there might be another sort of category, which is haven't thought about it. But let's see, it'll be interesting.
Okay, well let's have a look here, and the results are 38% of the audience do have the sample size here is 131. So 38% say yes, 54% say no, and 9% are planning it. So that's certainly to my mind, that is a larger percentage than I would have thought. Does that surprise you, Jackie?
It does, yes. Yes, it really does.
So that's good. So that helps to identify it. I think there were some comments coming through on the chat room that it's if you identify someone as vulnerable, do you there's some sensitivity about that, because vulnerability isn't always a permanent condition. So that probably is a good time to hand across to you, Jackie. And if you'd like to share with us your thoughts about how to provide excellent customer service to vulnerable customers.
Absolutely. Okay.
Presentation up on the screen. Just go full screen.
Sorry about that. I can't seem to get full screen just at the moment. That's just great, isn't it? Sorry. Technology today. Here we go. That's me. Okay, so as you know who I am, my name is Jackie Crawley. I'm the MD of K&B Telemarketing, but I've also developed with my colleague Elaine Lee a product that we call Trust, which is training materials and information for people, for organizations, on recognizing vulnerability and making reasonable adjustments, which I'll refer to. So let's kick off. Let me give you some cheery statistics. I'll try not to bore you too much with some of these numbers, but I think they're relevant in what we're talking about today. So we use the analogy, the clock is ticking. So every year, 1 in 4 people experience a mental health issue, which is being talked about a lot more now, but in the past hasn't been so much. Every single week, there's 100 people diagnosed with MS. And every single day, 813 people are diagnosed with cancer, and 1,121 people are made redundant. Those are quite startling statistics when you think a lot of those people potentially are your customers or the users of your services. But every hour, a Parkinson's diagnosis, and every 3 minutes, a bankruptcy, insolvency declaration, and a diabetes diagnosis. So it's very important to understand that vulnerability can be either permanent or it can be temporary. So someone who has recently had a bereavement, that's clearly a temporary vulnerability. But actually someone with dementia, that is going to be more permanent, a long term, and is going to get progressively worse. And I think this just brings into context the amount of people that we're probably dealing with on a daily basis over the telephone who are potentially in vulnerable circumstances. And what I'd like to say as well is we don't really want to be classing people as vulnerable customers or consumers. We want to think about that person being in a vulnerable circumstance at the time that they are engaging with you as an organisation. So lots of these things happen, key life events. We've all been through some of these, not quite all of them yet, but we will do. So from birth, which is obviously a very stressful time for new parents, parents obviously bringing children into the world and all of that entails. Marriage can also be very challenging. Buying your first home, all of these things bring stress and various things into the life of people on a daily basis. As we looked at there, some ill health diagnosis happens more regularly than we probably think about. And I'm afraid to say, divorce happens to a lot of people and also can be very, very stressful, not only for the people concerned, but the family around them, the children, the relatives, etc. And one that's becoming more prevalent now is the empty nest syndrome, as those young children go off to university and parents look to think what they now do with their life. Some may be jumping with joy, with others it may well be quite a stressful time. And very much more now in our lives, becoming a carer for someone who you need to look after. Mike mentioned earlier on his mum with dementia. I have a family member also with dementia, and keeping them in the community in life where you become the carer more and more is happening. And redundancy, a very key life-changing event. Very much when you think at that moment it's your fault, you're to blame, when actually those circumstances might well have been beyond your control. And very last one, well, death, which we won't linger on too much, but just to highlight that probably every single person who's listening to this now and who will be listening in the future has experienced some, if not most of these on a daily basis or through their life. So one of the key things we talk about is training, and why training is necessary. Why is it needed? Well, it's needed because companies like yourselves who are listening to this interact with customers who have difficulty making informed decisions because they are in a vulnerable circumstance. There's sometimes little understanding in organisations of the signs of vulnerability or how to handle that situation with some care and respect. And this is based on a lot of experience I've had visiting other contact centres, but also talking to lots of people. Some staff, particularly at front line, are often not equipped or might lack confidence because they've not felt supported from their peers or a part of the organisation. And sometimes there is no policy for addressing the problems and what they should do. And organisations may not deliver that consistent service that they want to do because of the above, really. And there could also be a potential risk of harm to the individuals and companies' reputations. We've seen over the past, particularly from the charity sector, where not dealing with vulnerable people in, I suppose, a really professional manner has actually affected the reputations of some of those charities. And you can see some of the headlines in the Daily Mail and places like that in the past. But training does provide confidence, consistency, and it does deliver best practice. And all of us want to work in that kind of world. I suppose one of the questions might be, do you as an organisation cover vulnerable in your induction? Is it something that you cover, and how do you cover it? What do you do? So what are the objectives of the training and information that we give? We want people to be more aware of vulnerability and its complexities and how changeable it is. We want people to be aware and have a better understanding to recognise vulnerability. We're not suggesting that everybody who works in a contact centre is expert in this, but actually understanding what some of those characteristics might be from someone who maybe has dementia or has been through a bereavement or has recently been made redundant will help them with that call. We want to help develop methods to deal with the vulnerability better and develop that confidence and sensitivity towards vulnerability. I'm sure a lot of people who work for you or work with you are younger and not necessarily have come across some of these vulnerabilities in their life so far. And we really would like people to become champions of vulnerability in their organisation, to actually be that person who challenges those policies, those procedures, and changes things for good. And what we want to do is, once you've understood and you adopt some of the training materials that we're potentially talking about, how they create and how you can use them and how you can use them for different audiences within your organisation. So vulnerability is a controversial label. Yes, it is. When we started looking at this, Elaine and I, about 5 years ago, we were actually asked the question, can you use the word vulnerability? And actually we felt that we should, because we wanted to bring it to the attention of organisations, particularly in the marketing world. So it's often an imposed category that some vulnerable groups don't actually like and wouldn't recognise themselves as being vulnerable. However, it's generally felt that vulnerability are those individuals or groups who, due to age, ill health, infirmity, minority status or otherwise disempowered status in society, are classed as vulnerable. So what do we recommend as steps? We recommend that organisers look to build the foundations of a good internal focus policy, create that policy, use it and work with it. If it's desired in your company or required, you might need an external policy so that people understand what you're going to do as an organisation when dealing with vulnerable people or people in vulnerable circumstances. And think about what reasonable adjustments can you make in your organisation? What changes can you make? And some might be very, very small. It may be communicating with a person in a different way, but what can you do? What does the technology allow you to do, and what will work for your organisation? and measure what you're doing now and what is working and do it more. And obviously what you can measure is from complaints or from satisfaction surveys, where you are now, and when you make changes and adjustments, how that's improved your stats and your relationships with your customers.
And Jackie, we're going to jump in now, and we're going to do a poll on this. And I'm just going to ask the question of the audience. Do you have a vulnerable customer policy in place in your contact center? So the answers to this are no, we don't have a vulnerable customer policy. Yes, we do. We're planning it, or we haven't thought of it. So if you'd just like to put in whether you have a vulnerable customer policy in place, I'm looking specifically in the customer services or in the contact center or on the sales center that you're in, rather than necessarily a sort of company-wide blanket approach. So it'd be quite interesting to see the results on here. I think we've got most people voted, so I'm just going to share the results here. So 45% do indeed, 36 don't, 11% are planning it, and 9% hadn't thought of that. So maybe that would be quite an interesting takeaway, that if you don't have a vulnerable customer policy in place in your contact center, this may be one of your one of your key takeaways to actually put that in place. So some quite fascinating results there. I'm going to pass it back to you, Jackie. Okay. So are you pleased with that number or saddened?
I think I'm a little surprised, actually. I thought more people would have a policy, but I do understand it's very challenging. And actually on my next slide, I've just put some of the tools that we've created. They are from the DMA and you can download them, but they are free of charge. And obviously I can help organisations, which I do, create these. One is white paper guidelines for contact centres to help. We did a webinar a long time ago. I wasn't involved with Age UK and Barclaycard, which is quite interesting. But the two key things in there is an internal policy framework, which actually isn't us writing the policy for you, but giving you the framework to be able to write your own policy, prompting the questions, signposting you and maybe challenging you to think about the things that you need to in an internal and external policy. And that external policy, my understanding, I've put the end of October there, we're now in November, will be launched within the next few weeks as well. We've just put the final touches to that. And obviously training masterclasses and work that we're doing with the Vulnerable Task Force as well. So I would urge people to think about a policy. The reason for that is that it's very clear then to your agents and your staff how you are approaching vulnerability, and it will ask you those questions that you need to ask yourself to get this right for the vulnerable consumer that you deal with. So what do we need to do? We need to, I suppose, recognise these needs. Understand by listening what the characteristics are of the vulnerable conversation that we're having. What does the person need from the interaction that we're currently having with them? So we need to listen. We need to think about, do they have more than one objective and desire? And obviously if they're in a maybe stressful situation or they're very upset, that might not be clear on the call, and we need to make and understand how we can get that information from them and understand what their primary need is. And what do they need from you first as an organisation? And what can you make reasonable adjustments for? So do you need to communicate with them in a different way? Do you need to listen to them a little bit longer to understand really what the information is that they require from you? So once you've kind of recognised the needs, you obviously need to try and meet the needs. Now, this may be controversial, some of the people that are listening on an outbound call, is it a convenient time to speak? But sometimes put yourself in the situation of the person on the other end of the phone. Yes, they need to communicate with you, but actually, is there a better time to talk to them when it's easier and calmer? And maybe the same for an inbound call. That might be that they're ringing on a premium number or they've just had some bad news delivered to them. And if you call them back, you may have a better interaction with them. Always be prepared to change and vary your style of language depending on the call and what you hear. And I know this sounds a bit cliche, but please put the customer at the heart of your thinking. A lot of the training that we do, particularly with agents, is putting the customer into your neighbourhood or your community or your family members and thinking about that person as the person who needs something from you or desires to buy a purchase or service, but actually is also going through a vulnerable circumstance at the same time. Try to visualize the person. That's a really good one that does help agents. And please home in on their dominant need. That way you can hopefully satisfy what their concerns are before moving on. And obviously reassure, and if repetition is needed, obviously give that to them. And sometimes giving the customer a choice helps them. So it may be that they find it very challenging to have the conversation with you. So they may choose to have that conversation in written form, or as an SMS, or in some other form that works. For instance, everybody thinks when someone is blind that they maybe want their information in Braille, but actually only 1% of blind people can read Braille. There are other ways through using PDFs where you can get voice, where people can actually have more information. So a deaf person might want that, or a blind person might want something different. So think about the people in your neighbourhood and how you can change and adjust your circumstances for them. And take your time and give them space and time to think. Now, I know sometimes with deadlines on calls and wrap up time, etc., but actually these are customers and they are in a vulnerable circumstance. So let's give them some time and space to think. So we don't always know whether we're going to get it right or not. We don't always know that we will get it right because it's complex and you're dealing with someone over the telephone. You can't see them in front of you. There are very few hard and fast rules or lessons, but if you question your own assumptions by treating everyone unique, it can be very helpful. And we also recommend trying to build a shared learning of enlightened practice. So things that work for you, things that work in your organisation, share with your colleagues, share with other people, because I'm sure that if you do that, then vulnerability doesn't become such a taboo subject. And just be aware that you won't always get it right, but if you can get it right more times than you do wrong, then actually we're on the winning side. So here's an acronym that we use. Think, care, comprehend. Is your customer able to understand the discussion taking place? Sometimes we have complex information that we have to give over the phone. Can they assess? Do they appear to be weighing up the information you're giving them? And are they asking you rational questions? And are they retaining the information that you're giving to them? Can they recall the details, or are they just going, yes, yes, yes? And finally, evaluate. How well do they express or explain the communication that you've just had with them? Get them to repeat back and talk to them and agree with what you're saying. So what can your organisation do? We've obviously talked a lot about training and various things. Policies, good. Start with the policy, but start with something that you can use, adapt, change and review. It's all about responsible communications. Develop those procedures to support staff dealing with vulnerable customers. There might be within your organisation an escalation process where frontline staff, if they feel that someone is vulnerable, they may well escalate that to someone more senior, or it may be identified on the database that that person needs to be transferred to someone more senior in your organisation who can deal with that call. Vulnerable training as part of your company induction, as we spoke about, and as part of your training process. Use feedback from your surveys and any complaints to look at what you're doing now and see how you can improve in the future. But also think about what technology can do for you. And I'm sure Mike will go into this in a short while. What technology have you got now, and how can that change or be improved or adapted to work to benefit both your organisation and the vulnerable consumer? And just make information easy and accessible and easy to read, jargon free. If you bear in mind that the average reading age in the UK is between 9 and 11, think about some of the information that you send out and that people have to read and reply back to. And then it really does focus your mind on what you need to send out and how. And think about ambassadors and champions within your business. I've mentioned this before. It's always great to have those people. And we've obviously got our corporate stewardship and stakeholder management that we need. And then just remember that everyone belongs to someone. And just because a person is in a vulnerable circumstance and feeling vulnerable today doesn't mean that they don't need or require or want the services and products that you provide to them. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much for that, Jackie. I think there's some absolutely fabulous bits of insight in there. Certainly, you know, the need to have a vulnerability policy, I think, is very important. Certainly, things such as, you know, taking your time, give vulnerable people the time and space to think, and you know, simple techniques like, is this a convenient time to speak? I think certainly I've always long advocated not having an average handling time as a target.
Absolutely.
And this is a clear time when you shouldn't have it. Make your material very jargon free. And I think your other point, I'd like to do a poll on this next about induction training and training employees. So I'm going to ask a question now tied in with that. Does your contact center cover vulnerable customers as part of your induction training? So I'd just like to vote on that. So the answers are yes, no, or we're planning it. So just like to you to vote there. Does your contact center cover induction vulnerable customers during your induction training? So let's have a look at the results here. And 59% do already have it. So well done to all of you. If you are part of the 41% who don't, then it's probably a good time to either advance your planning or to build it into your induction training. So I think that's very encouraging, Jackie.
Yes, it is. That is very encouraging. And it's great to see all those people that have done it. But for the 41 that haven't, go seek out those tools or contact me if you need any support or help. But actually, it just creates such an awareness in your organisation. And it will also lead to those conversations about changing and adapting and making reasonable adjustments, I'm sure. So good luck.
Okay, excellent. So just had a, so we'll just hide this poll. There. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Yeah, there we are. So we're going to have a look at what's been happening in the chat room. We had a comment in from Amanda who said, I had the opportunity to attend your vulnerable customer workshop in April, Jackie. It was fantastic. We definitely recommend it to everyone. So is that a one day? Or is that
yes, it's a one-day session. We do 4 at the DMA offices, and that's because we've been sponsored by the DMA to do those. They're a full day workshop, but thank you very much, Amanda. I'm glad that you found it fantastic. We usually find that people go away with a lot more information, and they can take the collateral away with them and use it in their business. Very practical.
Indeed. So I guess details on the DMA website for that. Got a question in. Emma asks, many of our customers don't recognize that their circumstance is a vulnerability. What's the best way to ask a customer about their vulnerability without using that word? This is a bit of a tricky tightrope. Jackie, any thoughts?
It is. Thanks, Emma, for that. I appreciate that. I think it's really very challenging, not understanding enough about your business, but I think it's approaching, listening to the characteristics of the individual. How are they sounding on the phone? What are you picking up? Why do you think they're in a vulnerable circumstance? What information maybe have you already got on them? So what has been recorded, if anything? And I think really just take the time to slow the conversation down and not be jargon heavy. Think about what they might want from the conversation, as I spoke about. There's a lot of other hints and tips, but I think it's really just making sure that the agents are aware of vulnerability and how maybe they could change the way they approach the conversation and the tone and the pitch of the voice.
So we've had a number of people also suggested it in the chat room. Pooja has said, I think it's really important that you set a clear agenda at the start of the call and set expectations. Something along the lines, what I'd like to do is ask you a few questions to understand a little bit more about your circumstances and
Good
opens
idea.
up the conversation. I think it's always quite nice if the customer volunteers the information.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would be one around it.
Yep.
Mary says we always ask what kind of support they need. Is it financial assistance? Do they need a different communication method? Everything we do is guided by their needs. And Amanda says we concentrate on what we can do to assist them through the vulnerability. So some quite good answers there.
Great answers.
We've got another audience question sent in by Tom. What does the panel recommend where customers who have dementia can't remember their security details? And I guess this is more than just people with. I remember one thing where I've got locked out of actually quite a well-known fruit brand, let's say, where I'd forgotten my password, and then the security questions were, who was my best friend at school? Well, I had lots of best friends at different times in school, so I couldn't remember which best friend it was. And then they went on to say, so what's your favorite book? And that would presumably have been the one I read at the time. Or what's your favorite film? And so I ended up locked out of the account. And that's even without dementia. So what do you guys recommend as regards security? Mike, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is a tricky one, really, and I don't really have a good answer apart from, I think, being able to help spot situations like this or conversations like this. So from that perspective, I can help. But with regards to, if there is a best practice, Jackie, perhaps that works around, that'd be interesting. But I can certainly help spot it and if you like, flag it for the next time. But actually, how we handle it on the day, I'm not sure.
I think I would approach that. First of all, the person has dementia. So is there someone else who can support and help them? Because you've got that register somewhere. Do they have a carer, a friend, someone who can help them? And I think going back to Jonty's example, just don't make it too difficult for people. I think sometimes we do, but if you actually know that that person has dementia, there must be other ways of communicating with them, other ways of making sure that you can verify who they are. And that might be a third party. It might be a different way of communicating with them, that they can go away maybe and find the number, or that, as I say, you speak to someone who maybe has power of attorney, or you recognize within your organization that they can communicate with you on their behalf. And it's really, really challenging. I understand that, and you won't always get it right, but maybe that person shouldn't be communicating with you under those security details if they have onset of dementia, which is going to be challenging for them.
Yeah, I guess that
as the condition sort of like develops, where they're going to get by in the early stage, and then, as you say, then you can't get by, and you need your sort of power of attorney individual.
Yeah.
Perhaps we need to extend the CRMs to kind of capture that. Is Sally available? Maybe that's the question that you ask. If
Absolutely.
You know that we've learned Sally is the power of attorney, so I can't actually help you, but is Sally available? Maybe she can help us.
Well, we've got a couple of tips being sent in from the audience.
Right.
Jackie had the acronym CARE. Here's another one. This one is sent in by Scott, who says it's
Texas.
Which T, thank the customer. E, explain how the information would be used. X, get explicit consent. A, ask questions around the trigger. And S is signpost if needed to an internal or external support team who would help further. Jackie, it looks like this is one that you've seen before.
We actually use this in our training as well. I picked CARE, but we have several others. Texas is used a lot in the financial sector, so we always bring that in with groups within that financial sector, and it's a good one. It's really good, so I totally agree with Scott on that one.
So some quite nice acronyms there. And it sounds like there's a few more out there. So if you have another one, then I think there's one coming through which we'll come back into. Called Loved. I think we'll, if we can get that up on the screen, we'll come back to that in a minute. And we've also, the Scott again, who says a tip, use real-time speech analytics to identify vulnerable triggers on calls, which can alert team leaders and SMEs to assist the representative agent if needed. This can enhance the customer's experience and ensure the vulnerability is dealt with in the appropriate manner and produce the correct customer journey. Mike, if I'm not mistaken, I think you're going to be covering that in a little while.
At least taking my thunder. Thank you, Scott.
So Mike will be adding a little bit more detail onto how that works. Let's just go and see if I can. Here we are. And here's the last tip of this session, which is loved. Alan says, I have a mantra when helping customers, loved. Listen to, be on side, value, educate, and dependable. So I think it's great.
Thank you, Alan.
Very good. So yeah, so some great tips. We're going to be coming back to the chat room in a bit. The chat room's absolutely humming now. And if you're not already in the chat room, here's the address here, www.callcenterhelper.com/chat. So I think good time now to hand across to Mike. So here's the address for the chat room, callcenterhelper.com. So let's change across to Mike. And Mike, if you'd like to get your slides on the screen and share your thoughts on perhaps a few ways where technology can help.
And just to confirm, you can see the screen okay?
We can indeed.
Excellent. Okay, so great webinar. I felt this was going to be a good one, and thanks everybody for your participation from the audience perspective. That's really, really good. So my elements really are more about technology, as you would imagine. And to that end, I've got a couple of things that I wanted to cover. And I suppose just in the context of some framing, if you will, I kind of, we understand, if you will, because of we're working in contact centers so frequently, that sort of things like recording is there and quality management is there. So I've kind of conditioned this sort of like content really as to, I see those as expected capabilities and not something particularly new. So I just kind of wanted to focus more on the more new type technologies that perhaps might be able to help. So just to put that little framework of around the sort of content that I'm going to share. So what I've got really are three capabilities that we've been working on and that we have deployed. And these have proved to be very, very effective for us within our sort of customer base. But what I also wanted to sort of bring to your attention really, or having thought about the subject, how relevant they are and how useful they could be in the context of delivering great service for vulnerable people. So the three elements are, predictive routing, we call it, and it's a very nice, if you like, enhancement to simply routing work throughout the contact center based upon simple logic. So it gets a bit more sophisticated, both on the agent side, but also on the customer side. So I'll explore a bit more about that as we go through. And then a very nice capability is this, what we call virtual assistant. And I think this can be very powerful because it does bring in that kind of real-time element that Scott was steering us to earlier. But it's also, if you will, it kind of covers many other sort of aspects of the agent's kind of work and how they handle maybe a vulnerable customer on their desk at that moment in time. And certainly, do I want to have a dedicated team just for vulnerable people, or actually can I upskill my entire team to be able to handle these customers? And to that end, why not? Why do they have to have a special team just because? Well, anyway, maybe that's the best answer perhaps, but maybe not. So from that perspective, I'll be interested in some thoughts on that. And then the last one, I think, as you might expect, would be analytics. And it's a well-trodden path, if you will, analytics. But it does give us a very, very detailed understanding of every call and every chat, every email, every social, every SMS, and it kind of puts it in a very sort of a useful, if you like, and similar format, so that we can really smash it with questions. And some great questions, I think, coming out of this webinar are, what are the behaviors that we recognize as being vulnerable, and can we sort of capture those in analytics? So we'll explore that a bit more as we go through. So let me first start off on the predictive routing. So we've actually called it, if you like, automated routing or performance. Forgive me, Jonty. Here we go. Automated routing and also performance. So just to build that a bit more so you can kind of get the context. I mentioned that, routing, instead of being just the simple kind of call flow, email flow type routing, we've been sort of aware for a long time that we know a lot about our agents, over time. We record a lot of their conversations with customers. We do a lot of quality scoring on agents. We understand their likes and dislikes. We understand their skills, and we sort of profile those skills and give them preferences on their skills. So we do have a lot of valuable information about our agents. We also get voice of the customer feedback and voice of other employees feedback about individuals. So to that end, do we use that sort of information readily in our routing decisions? And we would argue that often we don't. It's kind of more about configuring and getting calls through, if you like, to people necessarily than building a profile for Mike the agent to understand them better. So that's kind of the one side of our scale. And then on the other side, as you'd expect, we have the notion of the customer profile. So again, sometimes we can access CRM to do that. Sometimes we have information about the customer on board our own technology. So obviously, as a provider to a customer, I must know what products are provided to them, or the services that are provided to them. I might know their likes and dislikes. I might have an overview of the demographics. So being able to build that customer profile and perhaps to add into that profile, a bit like the question that we asked earlier and the results about, do you have a checkbox in your CRM that says, I know this customer is vulnerable, or they volunteered to me that they are vulnerable. Having that information accessible to me on the, having that information accessible to me on the, forgive me.
So I think you're just talking, Mike, about that if you've got a box on your CRM that says vulnerable,
Correct.
You can,
yeah, I'll be able to sort of route and kind of make a best informed decision, really. And that best informed decision is comparing the information I know about my customer, comparing the information I know about my colleague, and then making that best customer outcome routing choice. And like we said before, we know that the kind of simple stuff that customers ask are tending to be automated these days, and it's the more complex stuff that is kind of coming through to the live agents. So from that perspective, they kind of like their skills, their capability, the subtleties of that is becoming more and more important to make sure that the actual customers who are getting called, if through into a contact center, get the right individual to help them. So that's kind of the first element.
So I guess one variant on that, Mike, would be just a simple little thing like actually routing the person through to the last person they spoke with.
Yeah,
so they can actually build up some understanding,
Correct, and imagine the customer profile. I mean, we now have, if you like, that as a standard feature, Jonty. So from that perspective, if I know that I email this customer was handled by Mike, if you like, then the next email from that customer I will route that way. But the same thing applies for calls. So it's becoming, if you like, just a standard feature, nothing special, no particular integrations. But that last stage in routing is quite effective and could be very helpful in this case.
Indeed.
Okay, so then just moving on, if you like, to the virtual assistant, and here we're kind of just bringing in some of the capabilities of AI, so artificial intelligence, and that kind of sounds very sort of fancy and big data and all that kind of stuff, but really from my perspective, I just think about it as a really strong, if you like, processing capability that we're able to leverage for all our advantage, whether I'm a customer, whether I'm an agent, whether I'm an administrator. To me, if you like, AI is just lots and lots of we've done it before. We can leverage that sort of that information and let's utilize it correctly at this moment. So from that perspective, we have this capability called Virtual Assistant. And really what it does, it just listens in real time to the conversation. And as you can imagine, based upon what it hears, it provides some guidance and tips to the agent. So this is where I was mentioning about, can this now be able to enable or empower, if you like, most of the agents to be able to handle vulnerable customers. When it does sort of detect information that's relevant, it'll surface information to the agent based upon what it hears, and then also what it thinks might be the best next action. So it's also kind of helping the agent or thinking with the agent, if you can imagine. And I've got a couple of screenshots here just to walk through a scenario. And forgive me if this is sort of small resolution, but here we have an agent who's working on their desktop, and they're dealing with a customer called John Doe. And during that conversation, they're invited, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, I'll blow that up for you. During the conversation, they're kind of invited by automation. So this is the virtual assistant, and he's kind of asking the agent, I'm your bot assistant. I'm here to help you during your current conversation with John Doe. Do you want me to help? So from that perspective, it's like, it's an option. If the agent chooses to accept that help, then that automation is kind of running in parallel with the agent. And as you can see in this particular scenario, it's listening to the keywords that were spoken during the call. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the circles and the circles within the circles. So, for example, we talked about internet plans, we talked about current offers, we're also talking about not being happy. So from that perspective, if you kind of look to the left, you'll see where the bot has kind of surfaced to the agent some information about some new products. And in this case, this customer is an internet service provider. The current customer is on a particular plan. They're interested in upgrading. They're not happy with the current plan. So, you know, the bot is kind of working on behalf of the agent to surface the right information and does that nicely, provides the tool for the agent so they can inform the customer correctly. So, you know, quite a nice sort of simple scenario. But, you know, imagine that working from the point of view of vulnerability, that could easily be effective. And then in the same way, the kind of application is also thinking. So, you know, it sees that actually this is a pretty straightforward question. You know, the customer could do this themselves in the future. So again, it surfaces to the agent a useful guide to say, hey, Mr. Customer, why don't you think about doing self-service in the future? From that perspective, this might be useful going forward. So to that end as well, it's not just about servicing the information for now, but it's also thinking about what could be useful for later. So again, I think that could be quite interesting and quite useful in this scenario. Okay, so just to sort of summarize that, really, it's an AI-assisted tool, and what we would say is that employees who are using this kind of tool would be better empowered to be able to act faster and maybe perform better, and that's kind of why I feel that kind of with that safety net, if you will, on my shoulder, or like a wise owl on my shoulder as an agent, maybe I can kind of build the best practice that we may have learned elsewhere in the organization about handling vulnerable customers and share it more widely around the contact center itself. And also, hopefully, because they are, if you like, feeling, what's the word? They're working as a team, perhaps their job is a bit easier, more enjoyable and more motivating. So be interesting to see how that adopts, if you will, as an offering. And yeah, that's kind of one of our latest capabilities here at Genesys. So the last one I mentioned really was the idea of analytics. And with analytics, really what we're doing is capturing everything. So that's the first thing to remember. And I think in the context of this conversation, when I say everything, I'm also, if you like, capturing like pauses, for example, or quiet times in conversations. And just thinking about the webinar so far and listening to Jackie talking earlier, you know, some of the scenarios in, you know, what might be a situation where we start to identify that a customer is showing vulnerabilities might be the time it takes for them to answer questions, or we're repeatedly asking the question 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and how long are we trying to, you know, waiting for answers. So I'm not saying they are the sort of like the things to search for, but as an example of analytics, it does capture everything. And once I have that information, you know, throwing, if you like, queries on that analytics to, queries on the database to kind of capture the examples is really, really powerful. And then once I get those transcriptions of, you know, if you like, examples of good practice, that's really, really powerful, because I can bring that into my colleagues and share and help to educate and sort of show good examples of best practice. But I can also find examples of poor practice and again share that around the colleagues so that we're able to learn from that. And if you like, maybe adjust our training, maybe adjust our induction, just to kind of think wider, if you like, about vulnerable customers and leveraging the power that we have in analytics to make better decisions around how we handle vulnerable customers. And then the last thing I wanted to mention really on analytics is that it does kind of remember. So from that perspective, you know, when Mike contacted us 6 months ago, there was no notion of vulnerability. When Mike contacted us a month ago, well, we had some signs, but we weren't really sure. But when Mike contacted us yesterday, I was absolutely sure that there was definitely some vulnerability behaviors. So from that perspective, analytics will help me find that, track that, and if you will, flag that for the next time that Mike contacts us. Because to be fair, in 6 months' time, Mike may not have vulnerability. So again, with analytics, I'm able to kind of capture that sort of like sequence of different behavior traits and map them and leverage them, and I think ultimately give a better experience to the customer. So one thing I kind of wanted to sort of remind everybody is that although we're starting to bring in a lot of automation into the thinking, you know, no matter how many engagements are automated, it's the human qualities will always shape customer experience. And really don't forget that, because I really believe that in everything that we do, in all the parts of, for example, I was using Excel the other day, and it's kind of popping up with some helpful, tools to help me work through my Excel, and I know it's using AI to do that. If that makes sense. So we're going to find this in our everyday lives everywhere, whether it's Alexa or whether it's Siri or whoever. We're going to have AI around us all the time, and really it's just a case of no matter how many engagements are automated, human qualities will always shape the customer experience. And with that, Jonty, I wanted to say thanks.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Mike. Some great bits of guidance there. I certainly like the automated routing, route from, for instance, vulnerable customers to a vulnerable customer group of people, which could be, I guess, could be a virtual group rather than a dedicated group. Last agent routing, I think is quite a nice one there. Guiding the advisor using artificial intelligence, they're talking along, and speech analytics. In fact, I'm going to do a little experiment now, and we often ask if you'd like a demonstration of the Genesys technology there, particularly around the automated routing and the speech analytics would be good. So if you'd like to have a demonstration of the Genesys technology, if you'd just like to put that into the box there, and I'll go across now and have a look at some of the top tips and questions. So we've had a question in from the audience, and a couple of questions here. Mary says, does the AI of the virtual assistant become distracting? And Brianna says, how would the bot store information, and would it be considered to be GDPR compliant? So Mike, sort of two rather wide questions there.
Absolutely right. So we have to, if you like, so taking with the first one really, it is like an optional tool. It may be a case where if I do become very proficient, I may not want to use that capability. So to that end, I think it depends on how the agent kind of works with the capability, like they do, I think, with every feature. So if it's helpful and brings value, use it. If they don't use it. So from that perspective, I think that choice is always there. Certainly in the context of GDPR, we have to be very careful. I remember one of our customers, one of the attendees earlier was mentioning about the right to be forgotten. That's a very, very sort of like prevalent, and I can imagine at the moment a very frequently requested request. So you have to have your information stored in a GDPR compliant way. We as a vendor has to provide capability or services that are GDPR compliant, and we are delivering that sort of promise, if you like, to our customers and consumers. And we recently brought in a very, very nice feature in one of our platforms, PureCloud, which has a very friendly API to allow you to say, well, if Mike today has chosen to be forgotten, then it actually allows the sort of technology to go and basically not wipe, it's the wrong word, but it kind of hides all the information associated with Mike from the databases. So that's a very powerful capability, again, built upon GDPR. So very good question, Brianna, but very, very, very able to be catered for in the current climate.
Excellent. So we've got an acronym here, which is BRUCE. BRUCE stands for Behaviors and Talk, Remembering, Understanding, Communicating, and Evaluating. So that's Jackie, have you come across that one before? Oh, we've got Jackie on mute, I think. Jackie, we can't hear you at this moment. I think you may have muted yourself.
Apologies, sorry. Yes, I've heard that one. We do have that one in our training pack as well. We have a selection of them for different organisations, but Joe, yes, another good useful one. And I think it's the one that works for you as an organisation and your team. And yes, they're there to be used, so please take them.
And Mary says, I think adapting the communication method is really important. People process information differently and may need time to provide the information we need to make a decision. Brianna's asked a question around technology. How would the automated speech assistant manage with customers who might have speech and language difficulties? Mike, I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, indeed. So if we're able to recognise the information, we will, and if we can't, we can't. So in that sense, it might be a case where we can, if you will, offer and present options for the agent, and there might be cases where we can't. The technology is like a multi-language platform, so it's not just English customers. There are also, if you like, subtleties around accents. What I would say is, if you can imagine your Siri application, if you can imagine your Amazon offering, the Alexa, the Google offering. So these providers are getting great international samples from language, and as a provider, if you like, for customer-facing technology, we're not able to access those kind of providers. So in the past, we used to work with technology like from Nuance, which are very sort of designed for the contact center area, and I would say like early adopter language identification. Whereas with the other brands, if you like, that are available now, they've just got enormous international reach. So being able to capture accents is very prevalent, and we're able to kind of plug those into our capability very easily. So it's a case that we're leveraging those. So no longer are the Scottish customers left out from speech recognition. They can easily be detected and handled. So yeah, it's a great question, and we're kind of on it. So from that perspective, that's the answer.
Okay, very good. Let's have a look at a couple more tips. Amanda says, we also have vulnerable customer SMEs, subject matter experts, on at all times. They have the ability to spend more time speaking to the customer, can go to a quiet room if needed, can review previous calls, and have received additional training. So I guess that's like a vulnerable customer group. Brianna says, we always have a few mental health champions at our workplace, as the well-being of employees is just as important as the well-being of our customers. And when we're dealing with difficult information, team briefings or having a go-to person to discuss difficult moments can definitely help. I think that's a nice,
absolutely,
a nice tip there.
Very important.
Amanda says active listening is important. It's not always about what is said, but how it's said. Again, active listening does take extra time, so I think that ties in with your comment earlier. And Sharon says, we advise callers via recording on hold time. Our staff are here to help those who have special circumstances. So I guess if there is a queue in the contact center, that's a thing. Great. Saying, we do have something if people want to volunteer that information. We've got a question in from Nicola, who's saying, how are others dealing with recognizing and supporting different vulnerabilities in digital journeys? I guess it's fairly, Jackie, I don't know if it's easy to spot on the phone, but it's probably an awful lot easier than on a web chat or an email.
Yes, it is, and it's really challenging for organisations. I couldn't give you many examples. It's not an area that I'm expertise at, but we're trying to bring more of the digital element into the marketing and the vulnerability and the communication skills in the DMA. So I think we will be progressing more and more, but it is really tough and it's very challenging. And to answer your question, Nicola, I really don't know what the answer is to that one yet. And I think it's just looking at your processes and your procedures and just see how maybe you can make that journey easier for people in vulnerable circumstances. But I couldn't give you a definitive answer today.
Well, we've got time for a couple of more tips. Quite a nice one here from Steve, who says, think about becoming a dementia-friendly organisation.
Yep, great.
So there's an article here, a link on dementiafriends.org. Yep. So
it's really good. I'm actually a dementia friend as well, and so is our business, and it really it educates you and raises that awareness about the condition because it is so varied. But yeah, great idea, Steve. Great.
And Brianna has said, I would also look into people in your organisation looking into creating case-specific training or fact sheets to help people research different conditions to understand a bit more about them before taking the calls. I certainly like that tip. Well, we've reached the top of the hour, so if you could give us a little bit of feedback in one or two words, what did you like best about today's webinar? If you could pop that into the chat box. Let's have a look at today's winning tip. Today's winning tip has been won by Mary. Mary says, make time in team meetings, huddles or briefings to discuss difficult calls and share how you can cope or practice self-care at work. We often have very difficult conversations about sensitive topics, and having time and space bi-weekly to discuss it openly and honestly helps our team to feel bonded and better to handle those difficult conversations with people in vulnerable situations. So Mary will be in touch with you to get your details to send out a prize. There is a little survey when you leave the webinar, so if you'd just like to fill that in, that would be great. You can watch the replay later on this afternoon, and we're going to be back next week looking at the KPIs for live chat and social media. So just like to say thank you very much to our two speakers. Who've done an excellent performance. Thank you, Jackie, for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And thank you to Mike for joining us as well and for your thoughts there.
Thank you very much.
And thanks everyone in the audience, and we'll see you again next week, hopefully. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye.
Bye-bye.